Okay, this is Scoop Malaire coming to you guys with the story that I could attack from one of so many different angles. And truthfully, I've tried to do this several times. I'm just not quite sure where to start and how to approach it, but I think I've got it figured out. What it really is a story about how Rashid Qureshi saved my job. But on a bigger picture, it's really a story about momentum. I'm a big believer in momentum, and I think that this story gives a really good example of what momentum can do for you. So I'm going to start much further back than I have to because I kind of like to talk and I want to tell you guys how I got into this whole mess to begin with. So for starters, when I was 15 years old and buying shoes at a shoe store, a roadside shoe store, because they used to have shoe stores just on the side of the road back then, I noticed that they had a help wanted sign. So I asked them how old you have to be to work there. When they told me 15 was okay, I filled out an application and I actually had the job before I left the shoe store. They were really desperate for a part-time employee and I started working there. Now at that age, I was too embarrassed to be seen being dropped off by my parents, so I used to ride my bike with a shirt and tie to this shoe store and sell shoes there. And after about 6 or 7 months of working there, they actually went out of business. The company, like so many other companies, were consolidating and they were just going to mall stores. It was Kinney Shoes, but they offered me, I was really kind of proud of this, but they only offered two of us a job at the mall store at the 163rd Street Shopping Center. And I went and I worked at that mall. It was myself and one of the assistant managers, and I rode my bike even a couple miles further, and I wore a jacket and tie, and I did that all the way through high school. When I got done with college, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I went back to that same shoe store, worked my way up to a manager, and I actually became a manager of that shoe store. And then they went out of business. So I went to another shoe store, and they went out of business. But there was a department store. It turned into Macy's. At the time, it was called Burdines. It was the Florida version of Macy's. And when they consolidated and named it Macy's, it became Macy's. But this all occurred while it was still Burdines. And what happened was I got hired to manage the ladies' shoe department. But I did not know that this was the shoe department from hell. Sorry for my language, but this was a disaster of the shoe department. And it was bad for a couple of reasons, but I just want to back up and make sure you understand everything to know about this job. So I was managing the ladies' shoe department in a larger department store. The employees were all commission employees. They made 5.5% commission. That's what they made. There would be a built-in minimum. They couldn't make less than minimum wage, but they were just commissioned employees. And the general manager, who was managing the fifth largest store in the company out of 32 stores, had a disaster of a ladies' shoe department that was running 13th in business, whereas the rest of the store was running 5th. So when he hired me, I was actually on the heels of a horrible manager who was there for, I think, 10 or 12 months. And while she was there, she was fresh out of college. She didn't realize that she had inherited such a mess herself. And when she saw that it was more work than she expected, rather than just trying harder, rolling up her sleeves, she instead hired some of her best friends from college and decided to just take it easy and not work so hard. Now, that department kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. But if you're a department store, any other department, all you do is bring in an army of people and you pick up the pants, you fold them, you put them back. Or if it's housewares, you get the stockroom cleaned up, you get the signs right. Whatever department, an army of people could fix it, but not shoes, especially ladies' shoes. And the reason is ladies' shoes, any shoes, they come in shoe boxes. So when things start to get to be a mess, it could be a really big mess. And this department ran where you had about 400 different pairs of shoes on the sales floor as your sales floor models, but you also had a stock room that was built for about 25,000 pairs of shoes that must have had 30,000 pairs of shoes in it, and nobody knew where anything was in the back. And when I took over, they said, well, we got this manager with all this shoe experience, and we're going to expect him to get things turned around like that. Particularly because the general manager had hid all the problems from his regional vice president, and she didn't know just how bad the department actually was. So when I got there, they were looking for those numbers to turn around right away. And when I got there, I couldn't believe the mess that I inherited. And I had never dealt with anything like this before. And on top of the mess, the fact that you could open up any box of shoes in the stockroom and have no idea what you were going to find in it, let alone be able to find the pair you were looking for to begin with, it was just a complete disaster because the employees wanted to do nothing but sell because they were commissioned employees. I was only afforded one full-time stock person, which was nowhere near enough, but the stock people, their salaries were monitored really closely. Their hours were watched closely, but the commissioned people, they didn't care nearly as much. And to make things worse, 4 or 5 of the salespeople I had, of the 15 salespeople, were the old manager's best friends, and they just looked at me as this big meanie that made her go away. They were also college kids, and they didn't want to work very hard. Most of the other employees I had were either middle-aged or some of them were elderly people, and several of them had been there longer and been there when there was a time to make really good money there, because ladies' shoes should be a great department to be working in when it's running right. Well, after about 2 weeks of things not getting turned around quickly enough, and me just figuring out what it meant to be managing in a department store, the general manager and my assistant store manager started putting pressure on me to get things done more quickly. And I brought them down to the stockroom and showed them all the messes that had been hidden for so long, and talked to them about the magnitude that it would take to really turn this around. And they thought they were really doing me a favor, but they hired 3 people. They let me hire 3 people from my most recent store that I managed before they went out of business for Fava Shoes. All 3 of them were from Haiti. It was Ermite Henry, Mark Agusma, and Calvin Jackson. And the 3 of them came, and the deal was, because the stockroom was so tight that you couldn't be working in the stockroom during store hours because the rolling shelves moved back and forth, and you could only have them moved open to the person who was looking for shoes. You couldn't also be doing stock work at the same time. So we ended up having to get there at 4 o'clock in the morning. But I made the commitment that I would get there till 4 o'clock in the morning, work till the end of my 6 o'clock shift. But this way I'd have 4 or 5 good hours working with Mark, Mimi, and Calvin. We get a lot of stuff done in the stockroom. And after a couple weeks of this happening, we were starting to get a little bit of progress going, but we kept taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back because of the salespeople. When I was there at 4 in the morning and they left at about 3 in the afternoon, the guys that were helping me with the stockroom, but then I didn't find out till 5 o'clock that I had to close that night. And I knew I'd be back there 4 the next morning to meet Mark and Mimi and Calvin. So that meant I had to work from 4 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, and then the next morning at 4 a.m. to meet them back. And I was so devastated when I found this out. I just went to a gas station to buy a hot dog and to get away from everything. And that's when I met Rashid. Now, here he was behind the counter, really thick glasses and even thicker Indian accent, and he was helping 5, 6 different people at a time in so many different ways. There was one guy who was delivering the gas. There was a problem with the manhole cover. There was a woman who was buying stuff from him, was arguing about the price. There were 2 kids who just came in a backpack, and he was watching them closely. He was on the phone with his boss while all of this was happening. And all I could think of was, oh my gosh, this guy is handling every one of these things. If I just had him as one of my employees, or if every one of my employees was like this guy, I could turn this around. I know I can. So I stuck around till everything calmed back down, and I talked to him. And I asked him when he started working there how much he made, and I told him I could have an interview for him the very next day if he could show up at the department store I worked at. And he did. And Rashid got hired, and he came in, and I got to tell you guys a few things about Rashid. Super fast talker, super fast thinker. Like I said, a very strong accent, but people could understand him, but it was almost comical the way that he spoke, because the tone that he spoke in didn't quite match the accent or the speed he spoke with. So it was almost kind of funny, but he did everything so quickly. And he was this person that had a photographic memory. So he was the only one in the shoe department that within a couple of days, he knew exactly where any style of shoes were. And as you can imagine, commission sales can be pretty competitive sometimes. But when Rashid was there and he was finding shoes, he would stop and help other people find shoes. Even the kids that were there that would be making fun of him and his accent when he wasn't around, because that's what the best friends of this former manager would do when he wasn't around. Especially at first, they would really kind of make fun of Rashid. Well, we called him Speedy. And it was amazing to see, like I said, him bend over backwards to help other people. But when he saw that Calvin, Mark, and Mimi, her name was Ermite, but she went by Mimi. When he saw that the 3 of us were meeting early every morning, he started doing something different than no other commission employee had ever done before him, I'm quite sure. But he started showing up for his shift an hour early and working for an hour for free to help organize a stockroom. And on mornings when he opened, he would show up at 6 or 7, roll up his sleeves and help Mark, Mimi, Calvin, and I, even though he wasn't making money for doing this. But by doing this, not only did he learn quickly where new shoes went to, but he also helped us get things organized. And he helped us come up with a system that actually worked. The company wanted us to take the shoes and do them from high heel to low heel, from different colors together, sandals in the back, and all these different things. And that way, if you didn't find the shoe the customer wanted, you'd find another high heel or something. But Rashid had this brilliant idea to actually take a price checker gun and put a bin number on every box of shoes when we put them up, and then put a number on each of the 1,800 different bins that the shoes could be in. And that way we'd be able to find where the shoes went when it was time to put them away. And that way they go back to the right place. But then he also had the idea to take the display shoes and on the bottom of the sticker of the display shoes to put the bin number where they went. But also we gave every different fixture in the department its own fixture letter. So the display shoe would tell you where to put the display back to, but also tell you where to find the shoes in the back and where to put the shoes in the back. And now that bin number or that table number was on every shoe. And all of a sudden, things started turning around a little bit. Now, the money started running out, and we weren't able to keep Calvin, Mark, and Mimi. But on the second to last day before they left, this guy showed up. He couldn't have been more than about 4'10", and he was like a bull. He looked up at me, and he was Indian. He looked up at me, and he says, "I know Rashid Qureshi." And I said, "I'm Scott." And he says, "Can I have a job?" And I said, "You're hired." And this guy came in and he became the full-time stock person. Calvin, Mark, and Mimi actually transferred over and became salespeople. One of them a cashier, two of them salespeople. But Naveed Usmani, this guy who Rashid brought in, was such a strong guy, such a hard worker, and so fast in what he did. And he understood the system because Rashid explained it to him, and he was fantastic. And then a couple of other things started happening. A couple of those new kids that were there really didn't want to be there anymore. And one transferred to another department and another quit. But two of them started turning things around because they were starting to make a little bit of money here. And then this woman named Anna, one of the older women that I mentioned before, she had a grandson that came and started working there. And he was from Spain. And he had a friend and he brought his friend in. And all of a sudden, once again, we're doing more business. And then there was another woman who worked in a different department. Her name was Azul, but her son's name was Afshin Matadani. And she brought him in. He started working, and he was a young kid, and he looked up to Rashid right away, and he just kind of fit into the wings. But before you knew it, we had all these different people working in our department, and things were starting to really turn around. And it got to the point that because of this concept of having the table numbers and the bin numbers on the shoes, anybody could all of a sudden work in shoes. And our biggest problems were the weekends would wipe us out because we would have these huge, massive sales that there was no way that 15 or 18 people could possibly sell enough or handle enough business for all the people that came in. Because if you didn't know this, women will check out a shoe department anytime they go to a department store to see what's on sale, to see what's new, to see what they need. And we were right in the heart of a huge department store in a really busy mall. So our weekend days would wipe us out. But with this concept of the table numbers and the bin numbers on the shoes, all of a sudden anybody could work in shoes. Whereas on these busy days, people would avoid the shoe department like a plague. Now some of the best salespeople in the entire department store had heard how easy it was to sell shoes. They were asking if they could help cover shoes on Saturdays and Sundays. And we would hire people that would just work the weekends, and we'd bring in staff. And all of a sudden, instead of us being fifth in ladies' shoes, our department worked our way all the way up to third in the company in ladies' shoes. And about a year, maybe a year and a month after I started working there, they actually started asking me if I would be able to allow people from other stores to come in and to check out what we're doing on our busy days to maximize these busy days. I can't believe I forgot to mention this one really important part of it. But when things were at its worst, at its absolute worst, really that same week that I hired Rashid, my general manager took me out at dinner time and told me that they were putting me on warning. And this was the only time in my life in any job I've ever had that I was put on warning. And the words final warning and the fact that things weren't turning around within 30 days were brought up. But because of this incredible change in momentum, first with Mark and Mimi and Calvin, and then ultimately with Rashid Qureshi coming in and saving the day, Speedy, as we all called him, we really got things turned around. And what this showed me was if you can take the worst of situations and just get one thing going in the right direction. And in our case, it was putting that the sticker, the price gun sticker with the bin number on the first box, but starting to get one thing going in the right direction and keep that going. But then build on it and do one more thing, and then starting to put it on every box and every bin, then people start believing in things. And then when you start getting the sales floor working right and you start making so that there's table numbers and you can find the shoes and anybody can work the shoes, then you almost can't stop it from rolling. But once you give up, once you don't believe there's any opportunity, you close the door. You close completely down any opportunity to turn things around with that little speck of momentum that can turn things in the right direction. And I wanted, like I said, to tell this story from a I wanted to tell almost like an international flair, because if you could have seen the potluck lunches that we would have in this department, there were people from all over. I had a certain point where one of the assistant managers actually mentioned the fact that our department was starting to look like the United Nations. But it wasn't in a bad way. What they were suggesting was, there's so many strong people in your department, why don't we start transferring them and some of them around the different parts of the store, which we did, and it really worked. I also thought about possibly telling this story more as a Rashid Qureshi type of thing, to pay testimony. I like to tell this story to my kids at school just to show them how beneficial it is to be the smart kid in the room, to be someone that's helpful to other people at the same time, to be a genuine good person for the right reasons. And Rashid Qureshi was a perfect example of that. And then the last reason I've thought that I wanted to tell this story was that I hoped somebody someday might be watching this video and actually come across Rashid Qureshi or Naveed Usmani, Afshin Matadani. I'd love to see Ermite, that's Mimi Henry, Calvin Jackson, or Mark Agusma. It'd be amazing if somebody saw this video and found them and turned them on to the Stories by Scoot channel. I could actually run into some of these people someday. But I think more than anything else, I just wanted to point out this amazing concept of momentum. At some of the most challenging, struggling times in my life that have happened since then, I've thought back to that time when I actually came back from being put on warning and not only kept my job, but ended up being used as an example. And truthfully, that performance in Lady Shoes helped me launch my career later as an assistant store manager in the same department store. Anyhow, some people will get different things out of these stories. Maybe nobody will get anything out of these stories. I really have no idea. But this is Scoop Malaire. And remember, I want you to subscribe, like, and share for more Scoop Malaire. Thanks a lot. We'll get back with you guys soon.